Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant. This video is a direct narration of the Reign of Iron expansion. This entry contains all the build-up and action surrounding the Cadian Gate and the machinations of the Lord of Iron, Perturabo himself. So, let us be about it. Agrippinaa, orb of a million scars. For untold centuries, the foundries, forges and manufactorums of Agrippinaa strove to supply Cadia and its defenders with the arms and armour required to hold the line against the ever-encroaching forces of chaos. Agrippinaa's importance to the segmentum obscurus was not measured in production and distribution alone. Countless times have the covetous agents of the dark gods hurled themselves against the Forge World's defences, seeking to plunder its technological marvels. In relentless and attritional wars, Agrippinaa's tech priests have perfected masterful strategies of defence. Instilled within their cohorts are protocols of dogged resilience, and fostered within the augmented minds of their Scutarii soldiers lingers a cold and unanswering hatred for the followers of chaos. Agrippinaa's importance to the surrounding subsectors has only increased in the wake of Cadia's fall. Without its supplies of munitions and material, the faltering defence of the collapsing Cadian Gate would have long since come to a bloody end. Agrippinaan fleets of macroclades have departed for dozens of neighbouring systems, responding to requests for aid, seeking to recover territories lost to opportunistic invaders, or charged with erecting and garrisoning fresh fortifications in order to slow the traitors' advance. Agrippinaa's military strength is stretched as never before. Yet, its priesthood remains as resolute as ever, determined to defend their Forge World from the encroaching foe, or die in the attempt. Agrippinaa System. Among the besieged worlds of the former Cadian Gate, few are considered as crucial to the Imperium as Agrippinaa. No other of the region's worlds matches Agrippinaa's output in weapons and materiel, nor equals its military strength. For countless centuries, Agrippinaa was one of the primary suppliers of weapons, alongside its fellow Forge world, Cantrael, and other fortified planets in the vicinity of the Eye of Terror. Agrippinaa's production lines churned out a wide range of military equipment, from high-caliber autoguns to heavy battle tanks, such as the Lehman Russ Eradicator. Agrippinaa's scale of production is so large that its refineries require a daunting amount of raw materials. To keep furnaces and forges burning, the worlds and moons of the Agrippinaa system and dozens of distant worlds claimed by its priesthood have been cannibalized in the name of industry, and their natural resources reprocessed to better serve the Forge World's war efforts. Ravaged worlds. The Agrippinaa system's innermost worlds include Barant, a gaseous planet whose decaying orbit draws it ever closer to the system's star. The burning atmosphere of Barant is trawled constantly by heat-resistant extractor vessels that siphon plasma vapor from the searing skies and haul it back for use in Agrippinaa's manufactorums. The barren planet Oryx, meanwhile, has been mined down to its very core. In the system's prime habitable zone orbit Agrippinaa itself, the formidable navy strongholds and fortified dockyards of Morton's Key and Orent and the hive world Narsine. The majority of Narsine's citizens have been drafted to toil amongst the labour clades that staff Agrippinaa's forges, or selected for impressment into Agrippinaa's Scutarii legions, leaving the once teeming hive world's population critically low. At the outer edge of the system are Kairos, an irradiated landscape scarred by centuries of weapons testing, and Urath, a death world and waste planet coated with the poisonous detritus of industry and warfare. As the millennia have passed, the ever-escalating hunger of Agrippinaa's manufactorums has stripped its system's planets and those of its neighbour star systems of almost all their salvageable raw materials. This has required the Forge world to stake further claims on resource-rich worlds throughout the neighbouring subsectors. This rapacious hunger for raw resources has been further exacerbated by the fall of Cadia, collapse of the Cadian Gate, and the manifestation of the Great Rift. Long renowned and respected for the size, strength and indomitable resilience of its Skitarii forces, the Forge World's once mighty armies have been stretched impossibly thin by the influx of Chaos forces. Some have been deployed to recover technological relics from the path of heretic invasion fleets. Others have been tasked with defending distant mining worlds, promethium extraction facilities, and myriad other components of the world's extensive supply chain crucial to keeping its furnaces firing. Still more cohorts have been dispatched to fight alongside the various Indomitus Crusade fleets, or pledged to assist in the fortification of designated barrier systems in the vain hope of preventing, or at least slowing, further Chaos incursions into the Imperium Sanctus. Traitor tides. The Agrippinaa system's worlds have not been spared from the fighting. Simultaneous to Abaddon's assault on Cadia came a concerted attack upon the Cadian Gate's primary systems. Agrippinaa was assailed by a sizable Chaos force composed of elements of several traitor legions and their accompanying fleets, as well as an invasion force of the Forge World's most bitter enemies, the Dark Magi of Temporia. The Dark Mechanicum heretics of that cursed Hellforge have on several occasions brought war to Agrippinaa's surface. Their corrupted demon engines and warp-charged weapons leaving lasting scars upon the planet's crust. So too have Agrippinaa's tech priests vented their rage upon Temporia, even going so far as to send an invasion fleet into the Eye of Terror in an ill-fated attempt to destroy their sworn enemies once and for all. The return of the Temporian forces and their demon engines saw bitter and attritional fighting encompass all of the system's inhabited worlds, decimating the labor clades and fighting forces yet further. The situation was stabilized in part due to the arrival of battered Cadian military units, who aided Agrippinaa in scouring the majority of the heretic invaders from Kairos, putting down cult uprisings in the hives of Narcine, and forcing the Temporians to withdraw from Agrippinaa's surface. In addition to providing timely aid, the Cadians brought with them desperate refugees in search of sanctuary. All have been offered protection by the Agrippinaan priesthood, though these promises of food, shelter and purpose are contingent upon their contribution to the Forge World's war effort. Many have gratefully sworn themselves to the machine cult, entering service amongst Agrippinaa's labor clades, or being inducted into the ranks of the Forge World's depleted Skitarii. Those who refuse to embrace such a fate have been left to see to their own survival, or, more commonly and horrifically, have been forcibly servitorized and inducted into the Forge World's battle clades. The frequent onslaughts of heretic forces and the running battles throughout the Agrippinaa system have proven especially costly in terms of servitor units, as has the need to operate forge complexes and production lines at unsafe levels for months on end. It is grim yet unsurprising, then, that the tech priests of Agrippinaa feel not only empowered, but even divinely ordained to repurpose what they see as obsolete organic units with no purposeful future into cyborgized tools fit to defend the Omnissiah's realm or operate his divine machineries. Many amongst the Agrippinaan priesthood even believe this is a magnanimous deed that bestows the blessings of the machine god upon even the most unworthy dregs of humanity. Though this pool of new recruits has somewhat replenished the martial strength available to the Forge World's tech priests, it has been far from enough to restore the Skitarii legions to their former might. With heretic raiding fleets spilling from the Eye of Terror in increasing numbers, there remain barely enough forces to defend Agrippinaa itself, let alone the neighbouring systems that rely upon Adeptus Mechanicus protection. It is surely only a matter of time before an ambitious warlord turns their covetous gaze upon the increasingly vulnerable Forge World. Airborne clades. It has been long centuries since any Titan legion called Agrippinaa home, if indeed any did, records being sparse and contradictory in Millennium 41. Equally, the Forge World's Ordinatus engines have gradually dwindled in number over the long years of war against the traitor hordes. Lacking super-heavy assets, the Magi Dominus and Scitarii Marshals of Agrippinaa have been forced to adapt their strategies to provide an answer to enemy titans, Chaos Knights, and super-heavy demon engines. In part, this response has come in the form of Agrippinaa's aerial forces, collectively known as the Airborne Clades, whose numbers have been expanded and their tactics optimized to deal with such threats. Squads of Archaeopter Fusiliers and Stratoraptors specialize in high-risk bombing runs against those targets to knock down void shields and eliminate point defense weapons. They are followed by Archaeopter Transvectors, packed with Sicarian assault specialists who cut their way inside their super-heavy prey and butcher the crew or banish animating demons from within. Thulia Gould, Archmagos Terminus, the Fire of Mars. Mars is the home world of the cult Mechanicus, its most venerable seat of power, and the greatest temple of the Omnissiah in the galaxy. Those tech priests who rise to the station of Archmagos on the Red Planet are accordingly mighty and learned individuals, and their mastery of their chosen disciplines is second to none. In the case of Thulia Gould, that discipline is war. Archmagos Terminus Thulia Gould began her illustrious career within the Ordo Reductor. A highly specialized subcult, these tech priests worship the Omnissiah as an avatar of destruction. They focus all their considerable knowledge and zeal into guiding maniples of cybernetic constructs, war engines, and heavily armored servitors to rain devastation upon their foes. This was a creed that Gould excelled in, finding spiritual fulfillment and grim delight in both the annihilation of the Omnissiah's enemies and the thorough optimization of the destructive capabilities available to her. She rose swiftly through the ranks, studying the holy technologies of destruction and their application upon a grand strategic scale with ever more obsessive focus. As is the way with most tech priests, Gould underwent drastic cybernetic augmentation, seeking to replace inferior flesh with the purity of sacred steel and sanctified cogitators. In her case, each augmentation was aimed at optimizing her capacity for strategic analysis and martial destruction, as well as the additional armor, redundant synth organs, and fiber cable musculature bionics required by a tech priest enhancing themselves for war. By the time she reached the lofty rank of Archmagos Terminus, Gould was unrecognizable. In place of that frail flesh and blood being stalked, a towering avatar of the Omnissiah's martial might, to whom everything, be it war, diplomacy, research, intellectual discourse, even existence itself, was a battle to be ruthlessly won. Icon of war, Archmagos Gould is trapped in an endless compulsive loop of strategic cogitation, analysis, and optimization on an enormous scale. Her detractors, most vocal amongst them the infamous Archmagos Belisarius Call, accuse her of seeing no value to any knowledge, religion, or technology unless it can be harnessed for war. Gould does not dispute these assertions, nor does she see an issue with her monomania, viewing it instead as a purity of enlightenment granted to her by the Omnissiah. To Thulia Gould, the machine god is a deity of destruction, whose approach to the galaxy she is merely emulating. She believes that he has optimized her for war, just as she endlessly hones her own weapons and tools, the strategies and the macroclades she commands to ensure their readiness and lethality. Archmagos Terminus scorns Call and others like him for what she views as their prolificacy. The galaxy is full of enemies, any of whom would gladly see the temples of the Omnissiah cast down and his faithful purged from the stars. Thus has Gould made the pursuit and elimination of these myriad foes her overriding priority. Until such threats are eliminated, Gould sees neither time nor excuse for any studies beyond the martial. If her belligerence and intractability have earned Thulia Gould some critics both amongst the Martian priesthood and some wider imperial institutions, they have won her far more supporters. The Scitarii venerate her as the Vox Dei, the living emitter of the Omnissiah's holy word, and have dubbed her the Fire of Mars. They adore her for a tireless and relentless march towards victory in every theatre of existence, and see in her singular devotion to the machine god a distillation of their own service. In her presence, and within the data radius of her thrumming rod of the Warforge, Skitarii are gripped with a focused fervour that transcends even the binaric bliss that flows down their data tethers from on high. Tactical and strategic omnidirectives race through their minds faster than the speed of conscious cogitation, optimizing their positioning and sweeping them up in grand maneuvers that see the foe outflanked, picked apart, and overwhelmed. Some among the Martian hierarchy have observed with no small disquiet that the Skitarii appear fanatically loyal to the Archmagos Terminus. Indeed, the cybernetic soldiery are so quick to flock to her banner that it has disrupted the ancient hierarchical protocols that have defined Mars's martial structure since time immemorial. Arsenal of the Archmagos. Over the centuries, Gould has accrued a personal trove of cataclysmically powerful weapons, several of them classified as exterminatus-grade implements of annihilation. Some she appropriated from those she deemed ill-equipped to use them correctly. Others she has reclaimed on archaeotechnological digs in hostile territory, or, feeling justified in straining the commandments forbidding experimentation due to the holy nature of her mission, developed from partial STC templates. These weapons of apocalyptic destruction have grown in number as the decades have passed, and now almost completely fill the capacious vaults below Gould's Forge Temple and Hadriacus Mons. Some of these devices are no larger than a thimble, while others are titanic weapons of unique design or exotic patterns of ordinatus engines. Only Archmagos Gould and the handful of tech priests high in her favour have access to this cache of nightmarish weapons, and they are deployed only sparingly in situations where their use is cogitated to be optimal. One such weapon never leaves Gould's side, however, for she favours it so greatly that she has grafted it onto her physical form. This is the Jericho-class conversion resonator. A unique relic of Dark Age technology, the conversion resonator converts solid matter into a thunderous shockwave of sonic energy that blasts out in all directions from the initial target site. The sound of the weapon's discharge is like a titanic thunderclap, and many Skitarii believe it to be the war shout of the Omnissiah echoing from the heavens. Anything and anyone caught in the initial blast is annihilated, leaving gaping rents in fortress walls or the armor of enemy war engines, or entire squads of soldiery simply vanished in a heartbeat. Those hit by the shockwave are either pulverized or else battered with such overwhelming sonic input that nervous systems are burned out and instrumentation scrambled. Wielding this terrifying firearm and her axe-bladed rod of the Warforge, Archmagos Terminus Gould leads the armies of Mars to one crushing victory after another. Secutor of Olympus. The Fabricator General of Mars has, on numerous occasions, charged Archmagos Gould to lead vast Martian armies out into the galaxy on explorator crusades. The reason for this are twofold. The first, and most obvious, is that Gould is an exceptionally effective military commander who has proven herself time and again capable of reducing the mightiest of foes to glowing atoms. The second, less publicized reason is that the Fabricator General prefers to keep the Archmagos Terminus at arm's reach. Time spent on Mars allows Gould to consolidate yet more power and influence amongst the Red Planet's military. An ongoing process some fear is the prelude to her attempting to claim the mantle of Fabricator General for herself, and doubtless redirecting yet more Martian resources to her endless wars. In addition, she has an unfortunate habit of other Techmagos' domains while conducting weapons tests, and then flatly refusing to apologize or make reparations while citing the holy nature of her works. This has done little to win Gould many friends amongst her fellow Martian luminaries. When leading armies into the wider galaxy on behalf of Mars, Gould often takes upon herself the title Secutor of Olympus. She views every battle fought and every victory won as another blow struck in the ongoing fight to eliminate the enemies of the Omnissiah from the galaxy and, in so doing, to protect the domains and servants of the Machine God. It is appropriate, then, that Gould's latest assignment is to march in the defense of Agrippinaa. With their maniples bolstering the surviving enclaves of the Cadian Gate, Agrippinaa's fabricator general has left their own system thinly defended, unconsciously so, in Archimagos Gould's assessment. It is her intention to defend Agrippinaa's industrial might, its holy forges and precious technologies, by whatever means necessary. If, in doing so, she acquires some of the Forge World's more ancient and destructive weapons for her own private arsenal, then that, of course, will be down to the will of the Omnissiah, rather than any intent of hers. Hystarii. Skitarii Heavy Infantry. Optimized for fire support, Hystarii form a crucial component of the Legiones Skitarii, their massed fire lending invaluable destructive power to their allies that can turn the tide of battle. The Hystarii are heavily armored Skitarii warriors whose cyborg forms have been adapted in order to bear reinforced armor and large destructive range weapons. In place of their right arms, the Hystarii are fitted with gyroscopically stabilized gun mounts that are wired directly into their cortical circuits and augury subsystems. This direct connection enables Hystarii cyborgs to fire more accurately than rank-and-file Skitarii. Powering these advanced systems and potent weapons requires large and complex back-mounted reactors and makes the creation of new Hystarii a costly prospect. Thus, they are rarely expended in battle with casual indifference. Millennia of adaptation and experimentation have resulted in the development of distinct forms of Hystarii. Hystarii exterminators are deployed with eradication casters, weapons that project expanded cones of atomizing energy that can completely eradicate even power-armored targets at close quarters and remain capable of causing lethal molecular disruption out to the limit of their range. They are supplemented by shoulder-mounted arc blasters, electrical weapons that provide a moderate amount of anti-armor firepower. Hystarii exterminators utilize this formidable array of firepower to gouge holes in enemy formations and to blunt offensives with sweeping fire. To aid them in these tasks, their helmets possess wide-vision slits fitted with broad-spectrum targeting augers that allow them to precisely calculate the expansion of their weapon beams, ensuring that the maximum number of foes are atomized. Hystarii Fusiliers. Hystarii Fusiliers, meanwhile, are equipped with neutron fusils. These heavy laser weapons are powered by neutronic coil arc reactors that combine densely collimated beams of focused light with electromagnetic energy. This fusion of technology ensures that a shot from a neutron fusel can not only pierce heavy armor, but also scramble power circuits or burn out organic synapses. The shoulder mounts of Hystarii Fusiliers are fitted with phosphor blasters that spit searing balls of blinding white fire, driving back any enemy infantry who stray too close. In contrast to exterminators, the helmets of Fusiliers are fitted with monocular targeting devices designed to aid precision fire. These systems enable them to swiftly bracket, precisely track, and accurately strike armored vehicles and other heavy assets. Hystarii Alphas. Exterminators and Fusiliers are led by Hystarii Alphas. These warriors benefit from more extensive and advanced metamorphosis than the troops under their command. Their superior cognitive and martial capabilities enable them to coordinate the rest of the squad's fire with superlative precision. Whilst Hystarii are ordinarily ordered to avoid close-quarters fighting, Alphas are equipped with power swords, enabling them to engage foes in melee combat if necessary. The Infinite Citadel. The time has come. We have borne insults and suffered fools for long enough. I have laid my plans for the Infinite Citadel, perfected the rituals and drawn out the schema. Nothing now can stop its raising. Let them all see what we are capable of, Warsmith. Let them all realize far too late how lamentably they have underestimated us. It has already begun. Astor and Kyrie lead the advance towards the Loyalist Risible Sanctus Wall. Cosfor commands the push to Chinkare. Jankal the Sentinel Worlds, and Gravox will lead the siege of Bellis Corona. Your task is the greatest of all. To you falls the conquest of Agrippinaa. We need its forges, its weapons, and its secrets. Secrets the loyalist drudges of that world do not even comprehend. You, Warsmith Morn, will punish them for their ignorance. You will claim these prizes from me and slaughter all who stand in your way. You will be the iron within and the iron without, the unyielding gauntlet closing around the throats of our foes, the hammer blow that stays in their gates and brings down their tallest towers. You will do this because it is what you were made for. You will do it because no other could. Most of all, you will do this because I command it. Go now, and return to me only in victory. Perturabo's strategic seance with Warsmith Kravik Morn before the advance on Agrippinaa. Warsmith Morn's host. Order of battle, Agrippinaa invasion fleet. An almighty assemblage of ironclad might took ship from the void spars of Mendrigard to bring Perturabo's wrath to bear against Agrippinaa. Having commanded Kravik Morn to advance upon and conquer the Agrippinaa system and its forge world, Perturabo furnished his favoured warsmith with a colossal host to help him achieve the task. Borne through warp space and void alike by a significant war fleet, Morn's forces included not only several subservient warsmiths and their own grand companies, but also sizable strengths from the Dark Mechanicum, Chaos Knights, and even traitor Titan legions. Most insidious of all, the Lord of Iron had struck a bargain with Vashtor the Archiphane, the demonic master of the Forge of Souls. Though Vashtor had sworn himself to an alliance with Abaddon the Despoiler, and would not break the terms of his contract with the War Master, he was not averse to providing supernatural aid to Morn's forces as they pressed their advantage, in exchange for a pledge to reconsecrate the forges of Agrippinaa to the Archiphane's worship. Precisely what form Vashtor's aid would take remained a secret known only to Perturabo and Morn, but there could be no doubting that it would prove as potent as it was infernal. Estimar Assessmento Traitoris, Order of Battle. Warsmith Morn, 17th Grand Company. 102 warbands of infantry, armor, and super heavy support assets. Warsmith Grice, 16th Grand Company. 60 warbands of infantry and armor. Warsmith Bakur, 8th Grand Company. 26 warbands, primarily armored and artillery. Siege Train. 8 siege covens, sorcerers and acolytes. Temporia Dark Mechanicum Infernal Artillery. Number unconfirmed. Temporia Dark Mechanicum Demonic Siege Engines. Number unconfirmed. Temporia Dark Mechanicum Omni Auxilia. 15 Macroclades. Chaos Knights. House Nor. Duke Malefice. 22 Lances and Support Idolaters. House Commentes, Lady Olverix, 9 Lances, supporting Idolaters and Militia. House Chimere, Sceptred Prince Nishor, 4 Lances, supporting Idolaters and Air Assets. Traitor Titans, Legio Furians, Princeps Omnia, comprises 4 engines and supporting infantry. Legio Mortis, Skullmaster Euron Gaul, comprises 9 engines and mixed support assets. Legio Vulturum, Princeps Crow, comprises 7 engines. Traitor Guard, 89th Styx Hatemongers, approximate strength 43,000 infantry and light artillery support. First Liberator Saints, approximate strength 20,000 infantry, 9,000 armored units, and an indeterminate number of zealot camp followers. 9th Never Guard. Approximate strength, 5,000 armored units, 26 super heavy assets. Cult elements. Numbers of cult and mutant elements impossible to calculate due to sheer scale and dispersal. Should be considered functionally inexhaustible at this time. Void ships. Advisory. Crimson class threat elements confirmed. Silence of Death. Firefall. Admiral Bleak. Reaper's Disdain. Possible confirmation. Ark of Omen. Netherworld Blade. Possible demonic threat. Full list of confirmed traitor fleet elements appended. Death is a doorway to damnation. The Purge of Cadia. Warsmith Morn's advance towards Agrippinaa was to be aggressive, but also thorough and methodical. Warp currents could have borne much of his fleet straight to the Agrippinaa system, with only a moderate degree of scattering and loss, but it would have left enemies unfought and opportunities missed to his rear. He could not lay the first foundations of the Infinite Citadel in such a fashion. Besides, he had a key target to claim before he could proceed, at Perturabo's express command. The first step on the road to Agrippinaa was to be the Cadian system. Though it had been reduced to a partly shattered demon world by Abaddon's victory, Cadia still occupied a prominent position upon the fringe of the Eye of Terror. The Black Legion had forces active within its system, and several of the less ravaged worlds still hosted fortified Imperial holdouts. Either faction could, in theory, disrupt the Iron Warriors' ongoing operations if left alive. More valuable than mere martial conquest was Cadia's ritual potential. It had been saturated with 10,000 years of powerful emotion, sorrow, determination, fury, and despair, culminating in final tragic defeat. These spiritual energies now clung to its corrupt husk like a tattered shroud, billowing in the currents of the warp. Then there was the world's value as a symbol. Abaddon's blow may have broken the corpus of Cadia, but it seemed only to have stoked the spirit of the Cadian regiments who still fought in defense of the wider Imperium. Perturabo was determined to crush that fighting spirit and silence forever the battle cry of Cadia stands. Even the world's ghost would kneel in subjugation before the Iron Warriors. Perturabo wished to incorporate Cadia and the warp-maddened planetary system within which it still lingered into his infinite citadel and remake the former fortress world in Mendringard's image. First, though, it would have to be bound in fetters of unyielding iron. Grave robbers. Abaddon's defeat of Cadia's Imperial defenders was thousands of years in the making. For all the blood and misery spent upon it, however, this world's overthrow was ultimately the unpicking of but a single thread amidst a far greater unmaking of the galactic tapestry. Once it was achieved, the Despoiler wasted no time on the former fortress world, for he had greater objectives to achieve. He was not blind to the potential value of the newly transformed demon world, however. Abaddon left a trusted underling, Iordax Quan, to oversee the final pillaging of Cadia's corpse. The task was a relatively thankless one, and Lord Quan was left with a small force of Black Legionaries who took the name Grave Robbers for themselves as a grim jest. Yet Quan was a true believer in the righteousness of the Long War and a fervent devotee of Abaddon. Augmenting his ranks with renegades, cultists, and traitor guard, Quan set about his work with the same determination as he had been charged to fight at Abaddon's side in the very shadow of the Imperial Palace. The demon world of Cadia was to be quarried for Noctilith, which was hauled to ritual sites raised by Lord Quan's sorcerers and employed in fashioning warp-infused warriors and potent weaponry. These assets would strengthen the Grave Robbers in the short term, while, eventually, they were destined to join Abaddon's forces contesting Vigilus and the Nachmund Gauntlet. Meanwhile, Quan's small fleet patrolled the wider Cadia system, navigating fluctuating warp flares and immaterium turbulence as they hunted down several Imperial enclaves. The Cadia system existed now in a liminal zone, where the corrosive energies of the warp swelled and receded like overlapping oceanic tides. Its star and most of its worlds had been wholly corrupted by empiric taint and would be unrecognizable to the countless imperial stalwarts who had defended them over the millennia. All were carried helplessly by their trajectories into and then again out of the roiling warp currents, immersed over and over in unholy energies before emerging ever more horribly altered. Local space was distorted and unpredictable, deviled by supernatural phenomena, ghostly echoes of Vox broadcasts and astropathy that rolled out of the past and future, spectral returns of impossible Auspex signals, bizarre spikes of exotic supernatural energies. It was thanks to this interference that Lord Quan's auger stations did not detect Morn's massive war fleet surging in system until the Iron Warrior's lead vessels were on approach to Cadia itself. Quan's stronghold, known as the Oubliette, was a heavily fortified castle encrusted with distorted gargoyles and massive weapons batteries that sat atop one of the shattered and ejected sections of Cadia's original tectonic plates. This island of tortured stone was one of a number of such edifices that hung above the demon world, trapped in its unnatural aegis by invisible currents of warp energy. Meanwhile, down on the planet's tormented surface, Quan's Black Legionaries had established fortified outposts, ritual sites, and noctilith quarries. From his command sanctum, Lord Quan hailed the Iron Warriors. He first queried the purpose of their presence. When the scout ships answered his challenge with extreme-range torpedo bombardment, Quan furiously demanded the Iron Warriors halt their attack in the War Master's name. This was answered only by Kravik Morn's cold laughter. After that, any efforts at communication or negotiation ended. The purge of Cadia had begun. Gauntlet of Iron. As brutal as Kravik Morn was, he understood well the value of intelligence. His sorceress had scryed the demon world of Cadia and gauged the strength and defenses of its Black Legion occupiers. Coupled with the whispers of Weirgin seeded into the foe's databanks by the Archiphane, these divinations gave Morn an idea of where and how to strike. The skies of Cadia burned with contrails as the first Iron Warrior invasion craft descended. These were macrolanders packed with fanatical cultists, mutants, and some of Morn's expendable traitor guard. They thundered through the atmosphere in tight formations. Their designated landing zones were noctilith quarries and fortifications dotted around the equator and northern hemisphere. Their purpose: keep Lord Quan's defenders busy. The macrolanders were met with searing beams of anti-orbital lasfire spat from enormous weapon silos built into and around the Black Legion surface structures. These shots punctured the underbellies of vessels still glowing hot from atmospheric entry. Dark Mechanicum gun crews in service to Lord Quan tracked their targets, chattering to one another in corrupted lingua technis as they unleashed the fury of their guns. Iron Warriors' landing craft spiraled downwards, trailing fire and tiny tumbling bodies, or detonated in mid-air blasts. A broken world. The warp had not been kind to Cadia. The former fortress world had been swallowed and vomited forth by the Immaterium countless times, nor as though the warp were venting brute frustration upon the fragments of reality that held it at bay for so long. That it was now a demon world was beyond question. Its landscapes nightmarish and sanity blasting, its atmosphere an unnatural manifestation, breathable, yet with the ominous sense it might evaporate in a moment to leave mortals to a horrible death. Yet unlike most demon worlds, it was seemingly not the personal domain of any singular ruling entity. Rather, Cadia had become a masterless and broken place. It resembled a carcass left to rot by supernatural scavengers. Thousands of mortal soldiers died as flocks of Black Legion Helldrakes and gunships joined the attack on the landing craft. Meanwhile, on the surface, squads of Black Legionaries took up defensive positions around their facilities, barking Vox-amplified commands to the mortal chaff who bolstered their garrison forces. The Black Legion were sorely outnumbered by their descending foes, but they had the advantage of prepared defenses and an extensive and hard-earned grasp of the local terrain. Yet they were also bolstered by the sure knowledge that, as the War Master's own legion, they were inherently superior to the invaders. They had no intention of surrendering, or of abandoning Cadia to the Iron Warriors, and would not be easily defeated. A little over 2/3 of the Iron Warriors' macroclades survived the run to Cadia's surface. These craft put down at a half-dozen sites. Not only the quarries at Screaming Gorge, the Rise, the Carrion Fields and the Shatter Pit, but also the Black Legion fortresses atop Mount Pyre and amidst the living swamp. Point defense weapons blazed all across ships' hulls. Black Legion guns and demon engines raked them with return fire. Hydraulics whined, the huge ramps of the landing craft crashed down to disgorge tides of baying heretics, wreathed in billowing clouds of crimson mist laced with combat stims. The Iron Warriors' expendable servants stormed forth with eyes bulging and foam lathering their jaws. Hundreds were mowed down by Black Legion fire, yet minute by minute they pushed ever closer to their enemy's defences. Countermeasures. Lord Quan had watched the Iron Warriors' landings from the oubliette stratagem with a mix of anger and contempt. These assaults, he knew, were mere distractions. He was insulted that the foe might think him fool enough to believe otherwise. Yet Quan was in a difficult position. Of course, he had laid contingency plans against hostile forces menacing his operation on Cadia. Still, the size and suddenness of the threat had left him scrambling to muster a response to the Iron Warriors' onslaught. His handful of void ships had scattered rather than face certain annihilation, trying to contest orbital dominance with the Iron Warriors' fleet. This, of course, left Cadia's skies, and to some degree the oubliette, open to attack. The enemy warships were even now maneuvering into position, doubtless preparing to launch strike missions against his surface facilities and his personal stronghold alike. Quan knew immediately that his forces were greatly outnumbered and severely outgunned. If the strategic picture were unaltered, his own fleet and garrison would be defeated in mere hours. Unwilling to explain such a catastrophe to the Despoiler, if he survived long enough to do so, Lord Quan issued a series of decisive commands. First, his coven of possessed astropaths screamed out the message Quan had hoped never to have to send. Writhing within their binding circle, the tortured hybrids vomited a psychic distress call into the warp. Cadia under attack by a superior enemy force. Lasting defense impossible. Employing countermeasures and delaying tactics. Send aid. Next, Black Legion sorcerers within the witching tower of the oubliette began a ritual of their own. It was a desperate working that consumed hundreds of sacrificial victims and many of the painstakingly amassed noctilith deposits from the Black Legion quarries. Yet it was better to unleash that carefully gathered power, Quan reasoned, than simply to lose this one-sided fight and surrender all their hard-won stockpiles to the foe. Better a bolt shell expended in defiance than captured and turned upon his brothers. Thus, as the first true attack wave of the Iron Warriors streaked down upon Cadia, aboard Dreadclaw pods and Thunderhawk gunships, the Black Legion sorcerers completed their ritual. Conjured forth at their bidding, a furious localized warp storm roared into being around Cadia. Long-laid plans. Unnatural aurorae crackled around Cadia's skies. Clouds the color of blood, pus and plasma fire raced across heavens, already curdled by the unholy outpourings of the Immaterium. Distorted demonic visages the size of continents shimmered into being, then tattered away again. Iron Warriors' attack craft were struck by warp lightning and transmogrified into detonations of fire and bubbling flesh. On the surface, the bloodied mortals of Morn's first attack waves cowered as mutagenic storms descended upon them. The doses of Frenzon and Slaught coursing through their bloodstreams, no match for the horror to which they were now subjected. Several Iron Warriors' warships, wallowing in low orbit as they prepared to rain shells and invasion craft onto Cadia, were assailed by spectral tendrils squirming from the storm. They fired maneuvering thrusters as they sought to escape. One, Ogre's Shadow, vanished entirely as 100-mile-long ectoplasmic tendrils coiled about it, and it was sucked unshielded into the warp. As the invaders reeled, so Quan's forces on Cadia's surface launched ferocious counter-assaults. Great numbers of possessed stormed from the Black Legion positions and charged the Iron Warriors' mortal thralls. Black Legion bikers and rhinos raced alongside them, while their surviving Helldrakes dove from the howling skies to join the attack. Hundreds of cultist and mortal warriors broke and fled, or else died where they stood, gunned down or torn to shreds by their attackers. Their already faltering formation shattered, allowing the Black Legion forces to smash through their lines. While mortal soldiery loyal to Abaddon followed up and engaged the broken remnants of the Iron Warriors' landing parties, the Black Legion warbands sped onwards towards the ever-shifting madness of the Cadian wilds. If they could vanish into those chimerical landscapes, Lord Quan's warriors were ready to wage a guerrilla war against the Iron Warriors. With the favor of the Dark Gods, the survivors hoped to hold out against and frustrate the invaders long enough for word of Perturabo's treachery to reach Abaddon the Despoiler, and for reinforcements to arrive from off-world. If not, then at least they would die fighting and make Perturabo's sons pay for their perfidy. Even as his ground forces launched their breakout assaults, Quan prepared to lead his most elite warriors down to Cadia's surface by sorcerous means. When first given charge of Cadia by Abaddon, he had overseen the raising of lithic circles, one at the heart of the desolate Elysian crater, the other aboard the Oubliette. Entangled by tremendously powerful magics and captive demons, the two circles of rune-covered menhirs allowed instant transition to or from the planet's surface for those who offered the correct sacrifices or barter safe passage. This method of travel would bypass even the short-lived warp storms above Cadia. Ritual daggers already wet with blood, Quan's sorcerers were now only minutes from opening the way to Cadia's surface. Once down there, Lord Quan and his elites could add their strength to the guerrilla war. In so doing, they would spite the Iron Warriors who had turned upon the War Master. Iron Warriors' grand cruisers were already closing with the Oubliette, their dark forms visible on the Oubliette's long-range auspicator displays, illuminated by flashes of empiric lightning as they navigated the raging tumult and traded fire with the fortress's gun crews. Quan was confident that, by the time his enemies breached his orbital fastness, he and his warriors would be long gone. It was as the Black Legion elites gathered, girded for war and ready to enter the maelstrom of shadows within the lithic circle, that teleport flares erupted around them. The weakness. It was Perturabo's way to run simulations of every potential scenario before launching his attacks, a habit Kravik Morn emulated. Armed with his sorcerously gathered intelligence, he had rehearsed the many ways in which Cadia's Black Legion defenders might react to his clearly superior force. He expected bold dynamism and determination from his foes. Moreover, after a few dozen simulated assaults, Morn became sure they would scatter into the Cadian wilds rather than stand and fight. In most simulations, the Black Legion forces responded too quickly to be entrapped by the lumbering pace of true besiegement. Meanwhile, factoring in Cadia's warp saturation and the liminarity of its system, Morn had to assume conventional assets such as orbital bombardment might be undermined by some manner of supernatural phenomena. Even he had not expected the sheer audacity of Lord Quan's plan, but he had anticipated enough of its broad strokes to have put countermeasures of his own in place. Weeks after the arrival of Morn's fleet, several Iron Warrior cruisers had translated into the fringes of the Cadian system. Between the vastness of the roiling void and their own techno-sorcerous concealments, the ships had remained hidden from the Black Legion eyes as they crept in-system. At a pre-cogitated optimal distance from Cadia, the cruisers had halted and launched formations of landing craft. The astrogational cogitations required could not have been computed by mortal minds, but with the aid of demonic difference engines, Morn's best warpsmiths had worked out the precise trajectories to carry the invasion craft into Cadia's gravitational well using nothing but inertia. Powered down, passengers locked into impact couches and placed into suspended animation, the invasion craft had shot silently towards Cadia, minute specks against the immense darkness of space. Some had not survived. Those that did had plunged into the planet's atmosphere on carefully cogitated entry paths concealed behind technosorcerer shrouds to resemble falling space debris and nothing more. Only now, as the Black Legion warband sought to make good their breakouts, did Krayvek Morn's secret advance guard make themselves known. Squads of Havocs who had spent days working their way into position amidst Cadia's hellish landscapes rose and opened fire on unsuspecting targets. Engines roaring, Iron Warrior bikes shot from fang-studded caves and flesh-walled gulches to intercept the Black Legionaries, accompanied by squads of Warp Talons and Raptors. Not every ambush was successful. North of the Shatter Pit, unpredictable tectonic activity convulsed the battlefield, even as the Iron Warriors sought to close their noose. Amidst geysers of molten rock and raw sorcery, many Black Legionaries fought their way free and vanished into the wilds. Meanwhile, the grasping fingers, slobbering maws, and revolting fluid fleshscapes of the living swamp proved too grotesque a distraction even for Perturabo's Gene Sons. Grimly dismayed, the Iron Warriors mistimed their ambush and were swept aside by their Black Legion targets. However, in a series of traps and vicious firestorms, most of Lord Quan's breakout forces were penned in and annihilated. As for Quan himself, Krayvek Morn moved to deal with him in person. The Iron Warriors had been shocked by the suddenly manifesting warp storms over Cadia, but not so much that Morn's bridge crew had missed the rapidly climbing spikes of empiric energy from the oubliette. Suspecting further trickery and realizing he could employ the very energy signature of Quan's ritual as a guidance beacon, Morn led his adamant Eternals in an immediate teleportation assault. It was a direct, even reckless move. Not all of Morn's Terminator-armored elite survived the brief journey through the warp to land their killing blow. Some appeared hideously deformed and screaming through their last bubbling breaths. Others simply vanished, swallowed by the abyss of the raging immaterium. Yet enough teleported successfully, Morn included, that Lord Quan stood little chance of holding them off. Dozens of Terminators blasted into being around the few squads of Chosen who attended the Black Legion warlord. Many of Quan's warriors died in the first seconds of the fight, scythed down in a hurricane of bolt shells and blazing promethium. Some did survive the initial surprise attack, Quan amongst them, and they made the Iron Warriors pay for their audacity. Bolt rounds and plasma blast roared out to punch through eye lenses or blast through minute weaknesses in the attacker's Terminator plate. Runic demon blades spun and leapt in the hands of skilled Black Legion champions. No few adamant Eternals met their end in those minutes of ferocious fighting around and through the lithic circle at the heart of the oubliette. However, when Krayvek Morn's hammer, last argument, smashed Quan's head from his shoulders, the fight went out of the last few Black Legion elites. Even then, none surrendered, instead hurling themselves into their foes with last bellowed oaths to the War Master, rather than face capture and interrogation, or worse. In the hours that followed, as the warp storm began to blow itself out, Warsmith Morn oversaw an operation to land further forces on Cadia and lay siege to the Black Legion strongholds still dotting the surface. He also dispatched squadrons of cruisers throughout the Cadian system. The fighting on and around Cadia was not done. Some of Lord Quan's warriors still haunted the warp-cursed wilds, while the Imperial enclaves on the system's outer worlds and the scattered Black Legion warships prowling the void would take time to eliminate. Regardless, Cadia belonged to the Iron Warriors. Detaching sufficient forces to pacify and patrol the system, and to begin the massive program of fortification and construction called for by Perturabo's plans, Morn now turned his attention towards his next waypoint on the road to Agrippinaa. "There will be an accounting for this insult, Mendringard vermin! The War Master will!" Last words of Lord Iodax Quan of the Black Legion, bellowed through a broken vox grill before his decapitation by Krayvek Morn. The greatest war cannot hold back hatred. The Siege of Taurus Tertium. While the legions of Chaos fought over the carcass of Cadia, Elsewhere throughout the former Cadian Gate, Imperial forces fought to hold back the tides of corruption and heresy. Worlds long ago designated fallback positions, should Cadia fall, had since become vital strongholds, their governors obeying Vermilion-level secret plans unsealed upon learning of the fortress world's fall. The Tauros system was one such holdfast. Cadia fell with such sudden brutality and amid such widespread empiric anarchy that countless opportunities were lost to the shattered Imperial defenders of the Segmentum Obscurus. Entire systems fell to the traitor legions, which ought to have been able to hold out for long years. Yet not all of Cadian High Command's contingency plans failed. On fortress worlds such as Magnifier, Durst Reach, and Dudron, ancient scroll cases were cracked open, and the orders within them followed despite onrushing catastrophe. Inquisitors belonging to various ordos, and even Arbites judges, read into the Segmentum Obscurus contingency plan long ago, and did all they could to expedite the Cadian plan and put to the sword any who, either with malicious intent or by dereliction of duty, threatened it. Even as foes swirled around every battlefield, intensive recruitment and training programs began, their purpose to transform raw conscripts into soldiers worthy of being called Neo-Cadians. Resources were funneled into rapid, wide-scale fortification intended to augment the existing defences of the holdfasts until they could be considered at least worthy imitations of Cadia's former might. Navis Imperialis assets were diverted from doomed holding actions or evacuation efforts to instead provide orbital defense for the newly designated fortresses of the Cadian Gate. Amidst the madness and horror following the emergence of the Great Rift, such struggles were largely doomed. Yet here and there, through bloody-minded human endeavour and blessed good fortune, successes were achieved. Gradually, wearied from months of bitter fighting, bloodied trickles of Cadia's original defenders found their way aboard refugee ships to several of the assigned holdfast worlds. Later, in the aftermath of the Noctis Eterna, further Imperial forces also braved the warp to reinforce them from other corners of the reeling Imperium Sanctus. These holdfast worlds, and others like them, became the last bastions of the shattered Cadian Gate. They were rocky redoubts in a raging torrent of madness, their defenders and rulers doing what they could to hold back an endless tide of invaders and maintain an Imperial presence within the Segmentum Obscurus. The ruined Cadian Gate could never be rebuilt, of course, but while even one loyal Imperial defender still drew breath, the Segmentum Obscurus would not be surrendered to chaos. Tauros Terrentium. One of the most firmly established Neo-Cadian strongholds was the world of Tauros Terrentium. The Tauros system had once sat within the mouth of the stable real space corridor maintained by the pylons of the Cadian Gate, rather like an island in a wide estuary. With the gate's collapse, Tauros now perched precariously upon the very fringe of the new Eye of Terror, in a region where fragmentary warp storms raged into being, then dissipated just as quickly. Fortunately for the beleaguered populations of Tauros's few settled worlds, the capital planet of Tauros Terrentium was a formidable fortress world that had long hosted a massive garrison of Cadians, Mordians, and other renowned Imperial Guard regiments. The system also hosted a deep void staging post for the warships of Battlefleet Obscurus. Tauros Terrentium's governor militant, Margravale Ostwin, had followed her emergency orders to the letter and been fortunate to receive a substantial influx of battered defenders fleeing the collapse of the Cadian Gate. So reinforced, and with the clear protocols from Vermilion-level emergency diktats to follow, Tauros Terrentium had weathered the first predations of traitor warbands following Abaddon's victory. Uprisings of mutants and possessed witches from within the planet's population were likewise exterminated with shocking brutality to ensure Tauros Terrentium's sanctity. Overlooked by the Black Legion as Abaddon turned his attention towards the Nachmund Gauntlet, the rulers of the Tauros system had time to build their world's defences and to do all they could to muster fresh armies. By the time serious invasions of the system were attempted, first a wild rush by the World Eaters of Lord Uthgor Skull-Eater, then with more subtlety by the Alpha Legionaries of Harrowmaster Shrive. The might of Taurus Terrentium was sufficient to withstand their aggression. Indeed, it was that strength which eventually drew no less than Cadian war hero than Ursula Creed herself, who led a contingent of the Cadian 8th to the Taurus system as part of her ongoing operations in the Cadian Gate. Her timing was to prove fateful, for it was mere weeks local time after Creed's arrival that word reached Taurus Terrentium of a massive Iron Warriors fleet approaching fast. Ursula Creed wasted no time in rallying the system's defenders and, with Governor Militant Ostwind's approval, sending out astropathic calls for aid. Here, perhaps, was a chance to pay back some fragment of the honoured debt the Cadians felt they owed the wider Imperium. This Chaos host would be halted in its tracks, and then flung back into the Eye of Terror in bloody defeat. The Cadian 8th. Vaunted as the Lord Castellan's own, the soldiers of the Cadian 8th Heavy Infantry held a totemic reputation amongst their kinfolk. Yet behind closed doors, the 8th themselves were a troubled regiment. Almost all of their original personnel had fallen defending the final retreat from Cadia as the planet died. Those few survivors, evacuees who had been too wounded to fight in that final battle, believed themselves to have failed their world and their Castellan. It was a belief that spread to the vast Neo-Cadian intake recruited to restore the 8th to its former strength, and one that forged a new culture amongst the ranks. Assigned now to fight for the daughter of the storied war hero they believed they had failed, the Neo-Cadian 8th were fanatical in their dedication. They would allow neither weakness nor hesitation to lead them again into disgrace, and so they fought for Ursula Creed with a dedication that was almost alarming. The Long Siege. Warmaster Morn had no intention of being bested by the vengeful Cadians and their allies. He cared nothing for their oaths or the reason they fought. To him, the Taurus system was simply the next objective mandated by Perturabo's exhaustive invasion plans. The iconic fortress of Taurus Terrentium, the Gauntlet, Grey Fathom, and, mightiest of all, the Tower of Detestation were his targets. Break those redoubts, and not only would Taurus Terrentium fall, but also morale through the rest of the system would collapse. This was not even a fight Morn cared enough about to see it through to its conclusion. Perturabo's timetable was characteristically unforgiving. Kravik Morn would command in this theatre just long enough to see Taurus Terrentium properly invested, and then he would press on towards Agrippinaa, leaving sufficient forces to continue the siege. The Taurus system would be broken slowly, likely after reinforcement by follow-up waves of Iron Warriors advancing as part of the next stage in Perturabo's plans. For now, Morn's task was merely to contain the massed Imperial forces garrisoning its worlds, and ensure they were too busy trying to survive to even think about threatening his planned encirclement of the Agrippinaa system. Onslaught. The Iron Warriors hit the Taurus system like a battering ram. Morn's warships swept aside the vastly outnumbered Battlefleet Obscura squadrons that attempted interdiction. Elements of Warsmith Grace's 16th Grand Company split off temporarily from the main advance and, supported by regiments of Styx Hatemongers and several engines of the Legio Mortis, deployed onto Taurus Quartum and Taurus Septarius to tie down and then crush Imperial resistance on those planets. Meanwhile, the main Iron Warriors fleet bore down on Taurus Terrentium. There was little of the cunning in evidence that Morn had shown when dealing with the Black Legion at Cadia. This was entirely intentional. Those had been respected foes, warriors of the Warmaster against whom conventional siege tactics would have proven both costly and likely ineffective. Here, by contrast, Morn faced mere unaugmented humans. His contempt for them was clear in the bluntness of his strategy. There was no denying Taurus Terrentium was immensely well defended. However, it was a fortress, plain and simple. Kravik Morn knew how to break open a fortress. The battle in orbit was bloody but short-lived. Taurus Terrentium's orbital defense platforms were numerous and well-armed, crewed by hard-bitten veterans of the Navis Imperialis. They lasted almost 6 hours local standard time before, one after another, the garrison forces were butchered and the defense platforms captured by Iron Warriors boarding parties. The platforms had been constructed so that, in the event of capture, their formidable arrays of heavy guns could not be turned against the planet's surface. However, by taking the battle stations intact, Morn not only gained access to their stores of ammunition, food and fuel, but also captured a ready-made outer contravallation for his planetary siege works, one that his fleet set about putting to use with immediate effect. Iron Warrior's grand cruisers now settled over Taurus Terrentium to unleash withering bombardments and waves of landing craft. The firestorm that rose to meet them was prodigious. The fortress world boasted scores of anti-orbital silos across its surface, alongside air bases able to launch swarms of void-capable interceptor craft. Dogfights roiled through the skies from pole to pole. Pillars of lasfire stabbed up and down through the atmosphere, some splashing against void shields, others blasting open Imperial fortifications or reducing Iron Warriors warships to short-lived supernovae. Wreckage rained down through the planet's atmosphere, entire sections of shattered starfort and Chaos warship glowing red and trailing fire as they plummeted. Despite the defenders' efforts, the Iron Warriors swiftly gouged initial beachheads, first on the Aquiline Plains south of Greyfathom, then in the Styrian Heights and in the suburbs of Bellicosta Habsprawl. Warriors of the 17th Grand Company dug in and prepared to meet the inevitable response. It was during these critical hours that Kravek Morn was forced to admit his first grudging respect for Lord Castellan Ursula Creed, whose coordinated response to the Iron Warriors' landing was swift and effective. A counterattack by Cadian armor and mechanized infantry saw Iron Warriors on the Aquiline Plains encircled and overrun, shortly before those in the Bellicosta suburbs were pounded to ruin by massed artillery. It was all those Iron Warriors at the Styrian Heights could do to hold on to their own positions, much less aid their allies. Yet the pressure from orbit was relentless. 4 more Iron Warriors landing sites were established, then another 6. Though several were purged by swift combined arms offensives, those that endured were fortified by warpsmiths and dedicated demon engines, even as fighting raged around them. At these sites, the Iron Warriors landed fresh waves of gunships laden with additional infantry and supporting heavy armor. Meanwhile, cultists and dark mechanicum servitors labored to fortify their masters' gains. Hour by hour, fortifications spread outward from the Iron Warriors' beachheads until, in places, they linked up. Again and again, the Imperial forces counterattacked, attempting to stall the spread of the siege works and drive back the invaders. Yet as hours turned to days, then weeks, the Iron Warriors' grip on Taurus Terrentium tightened. By the time Titan landers of the Legio Mortis and Furians rumbled down through the atmosphere, the Gauntlet, Greyfathom, and the Tower of Detestation were all besieged. Stronghold. The Tower of Detestation was the mightiest fortress on Taurus Terrentium and housed both the seat of the Governor Militant and also Creed's command sanctum. Looming as large as some hives, the fortress was surrounded by hundreds of miles of trenchworks, outer bastions, and martyr lines. At its heart rose the core bastion, a mountain of imperial architecture bristling with battlements, weapons, turrets, and barracks. The fortress's eastern slopes were given over to the gun emplacements of the Dominus batteries, whilst its northern fastness boasted its secondary command keep, and its southern fastness possessed concentric rings of staggered fortifications to shield the astropathic sanctum at its heart. Millions of Imperial soldiers and hundreds of thousands of war engines defended the Tower of Detestation. Overlapping void shields protected it from orbital bombardment. It was as redoubtable a fortress as Imperial minds could conceive. It was also the ideal target for the Iron Warriors' style of warfare. The attack began with bombardment. Monstrous biochemical field guns, tended by dark mechanicum adepts from Temporia, thundered all around the Tower of Detestation. Megatons of explosive and blast after searing blast of ectoplasm vomited from the weapon's drooling maws, flared against shields. Missiles screamed from atop the broad shoulders of traitor titans, their detonations rippling dark across the fortress's resilient hide. Traitor Guard artillery pounded the Imperial outworks. Trenches filled with fire reduced infantry to ashes. Battle tanks were lifted into the air by ferocious explosions and crashed down on the luckless souls sheltering beneath. Soldiers went mad from the terror and sensory overload as the Iron Warrior salvos pulverized minefields, severed razor wire, and gouged navigable routes towards the fortress's walls. The Imperial defenders launched localized counterattacks and sabotage raids to spike traitor guns or call in airstrikes by Navis Imperialis bombers. Lances of House Hawkshroud sallied out 3 times, led by Knights Dysteria and Valiant, to rebuff the Iron Warriors' attacks. 10 days after the bombardment commenced, the first true onslaught began. From the east came Traitor Guard tanks and super-heavy war engines of the 9th Never Guard and 1st Liberated Saints. Warsmith Bakker's 8th Grand Company launched a 2-pronged attack from the south, his forces led by packs of Defilers and Forge Fiends, and flanked by another push led by the Legio Furians. Warsmith Morn attacked from the north, his Land Raider Harpaxus leading an enormous armoured spearhead over the ruined trenchworks towards the outer walls of the western fastness. Hours of fighting followed. Squadrons of Iron Warriors tanks and demon engines blasted the fortress from close range. Many were themselves blown apart by the defenders, even as they sought to widen cracks caused by the initial bombardment. Siege towers ground forward on spiked and armoured tracks, powered by roaring soul forges and packed with augmetic mutants and their Iron Warriors masters. Some were riddled with fire or toppled in flames. Others reached the ramparts of the northern fastness and, joining their efforts to Morns, their occupants reached its outermost levels. To the south, House Hawkshroud led another countercharge alongside speeding battle tanks, slaying the Banelord Titan Repugnant Vermis before its Balestar reactor overloaded, obliterating everything in a quarter-mile radius. The encirclement. As he battered a path forward, Morn kept half an eye on the wider situation. His was the most successful assault and the only one to breach the Tower of Detestation, although his forces had ground down defences on every front. To the east, the Traitor Guard had been halted by a counterattack led by elements of the Cadian 8th. To the south, Warsmith Backer had broken the fortress's outer trench lines but lost momentum beneath the walls. Morn himself had forced a considerable breach and had plentiful forces available to press for the secondary command keep, yet sudden panicked voices over the Vox network gave him pause. Morn's scowl deepened as he caught fractured reports of strike cruisers in the liveries of the Black Templars and Imperial Fists running the orbital blockade to deploy gunships and landers into the atmosphere. Moments later came word of the first Space Marine landings to the southeast and northwest. Heavy gunships deploying impulsors, repulsors, and gladiators by the squadron, backed up by hulking dreadnoughts and terminators. Worst of all, they were led by a formidable Imperial Fist captain who the Iron Warriors had long learned to hate. Darnath Lysander had come to Taurus Terrentium, and his wrath was thunderous. In a moment, the battle changed. Grav repulsor battle tanks in vibrant yellow duelled with outflanked traitor predators and vindicators, hammering volleys through the tank's side and rear armor and causing them to detonate in fireballs. Captain Lysander and his elite met a demonic siege tower head-on, fighting their way aboard the titanic construct and slaughtering its passengers before toppling it with explosive charges. Elsewhere, Castellan Zweeland led the Black Templars into an unprepared horde of siege troops. The resultant slaughter was nothing short of butchery. Buoyed by the Space Marines and the impassioned words of Ursula Creed booming from every loud hailer, the defenders pushed back. Instinct urged Morn to drive his assault on or vent his fury at the hated Sons of Dawn. Yet he was a better commander than that. A glance at updated Auspex maps showed a real danger that spearheads of Black Templars and Imperial Fists could sever Morn's line of advance and trap his warriors within the western fastness, there to be surrounded and overrun. Elsewhere, Warsmith Bakir's forces were floundering as they sought to fight off the newly arrived Space Marines and deal with the guns of the eastern fastness at the same time. The Loyalist orbital drop had turned this battle against the Iron Warriors, and if Morn did not order the retreat, they would maul his forces. However, the Warsmith knew with cold certainty that the foe could not expect further reinforcement. Whatever desperate tactics Lysander had employed to break through the Iron Warriors' orbital blockade could not succeed twice. The Sons of Dawn had reached the Tower of Detestation and reinforced it, but in doing so, they had trapped themselves within Morn's ironclad encirclement. This siege would not end quickly, but he was certain it could only end one way, with the fortress in ruins and its defenders' corpses heaped on pyres. With this thought, Warsmith Morn ordered the retreat. Over the next hour, the Iron Warriors pulled back, cutting their way free of the fortress's outer defences, while barrages covered their retreat. For their part, Lysander's Imperial Fists and their Black Templar allies harried the traitors before pulling back to bolster the defences of the Tower of Detestation. Warsmith Morn did not lead another offensive against the battered fortress. With the arrival of the Space Marines, dreams of swift victory had evaporated, and Morn had duties elsewhere. Passing command to Warsmith Bakir, while biting down on his visceral need to humble Lysander and his Imperial Fists, Morn marshalled his Grand Company and many of their support elements, then pressed on towards Agrippinaa. He left behind a planet besieged and a nightmarish meat-grinder war whose merciless cogs were only just beginning to churn. Taurus Terrentium would be a place of blood, skulls, and misery before the Iron Warriors were done. Lysander's Road. Captain Lysander had been racing to the aid of Bellis Corona when the distress call from Taurus Terrentium was detected by his ship's astropaths. It left the Imperial Fist torn between duties. For the naval base at Bellis Corona was a vital Imperial installation, yet so too was the fortified Taurus system. In the end, it was his ally, Castellan Zweland of the Black Templars, who decided the matter. Zweland's crusading oaths included a vehement vow to pursue and destroy the Sons of Perturabo wherever they may be found. And so he determined to change course and strike for Taurus Terrentium without delay. Believing that many other forces were racing to the aid of Bellis Corona, and unwilling to leave his oath-sworn brother to fight alone, Lysander joined his might to that of Zweland. Let the hated Iron Warriors bear the brunt of his fury at being forced to choose between which Imperial strongholds he would defend, or which lives he would try to save. The chamber's silence is broken by a brittle clatter, as though someone had overturned a game board and scattered its pieces. The sound is made by exquisite rune stones falling from where they hung suspended in midair to strike the wraithbone floor. Several glow like ingots spilled from a furnace. 2 have shattered. Their shards revolve lazily even after they have bounced to a stop, charged with latent psychic animus. Eldred Ulthran opens his eyes and releases a breath. His exhalation is soft but freighted with dismay. Carefully he rises to his feet and studies the arrangement in which his runestones have landed. He dare not disturb them until he has committed all to memory. The slightest detail could offer vital nuance, yet the stillness of his physical self contrasts with the hurricane raging through Ulthran's mind. His Farseeing replays itself with inescapable clarity. That which a Master of Mindregard has set in motion cannot be permitted. The consequences will be cataclysmic. The weight on Ulthran's shoulders redoubles at the thought that his beloved craftworld must bleed again to combat yet another existential threat. Yet, if he is right, then the hosts of Ulthwé may be the only ones who can stop it in time. On dozens of worlds and space stations across the Imperium Sanctus, a rallying cry rings out. It echoes through Vox networks and reverberates from loud hailers. It is barked by scarred officers at war crime soldiery. It is repeated like prayer by the rank and file. It takes hold of hearts and minds. It is simple, stirring, and it offers a chance, if not for redemption, then at least to fight shoulder to shoulder with its bitter and bloodied cousin. The Lord Castellan calls for aid. She has raised the banner of the 8th upon Taros Torrentium, and has commanded those who name themselves Cadian to march at her side. For some regiments, the call must go unanswered. They are mired in battle, half a galaxy away from the Cadian Gate, tangled in bureaucracy or burdened by duty. For others, the rallying cry is the spark that lights the fires of a new crusade. 1, then 2, then a dozen or more army groups muster to answer Lord Castellan Ursula Creed's summons. Transported by warships of the Navis Imperialis, supported by allied Imperial forces, they plunge into the warp. Their destination is the Cadian Gate. Their purpose is honor and vengeance. In a shadowed alcove, a servitor lolls, pale and drooling in its cradle of wires. A shudder runs through its grey flesh. Truncated fingers twitch as though hunting for cogitated keys to strike. The Revenant's eye lenses glow. Its head comes up and its jaws yawn in a scream that emerges as parchment unspooling from a hopper in the servitor's gullet. Servo stylus extended like spider legs from the roof of its mouth and begin a frantic Strivener's dance. When the act of regurgitative communication is complete, the servitor slumps again. A bell set above its alcove tolls. A hulking figure comes in answer, moving through the tightly controlled bustle of the bridge of the battle station. Phalanx. They wear power armor emblazoned with the insignia of the Imperial Fist. The badges of rank convey extreme seniority. They tear off the spool of parchment and scan its message. It has been summarized from an encoded astropathic missive. It bears the personal seal and code identifiers of First Captain Lysander. Its content causes a muscle under the officer's eye to twitch, the slightest of tells yet, to any who knew him, a sign of rage boiling just beneath the surface. He turns to survey the bridge, the hundreds of Circen adepts toiling to coordinate ongoing efforts against the swarms of High Fleet Leviathan. He nods once, sharp and decisive. Action is required. Oaths of loyalty must be called in. Successors must be contacted. Banners must be raised, and the loathsome Get of Perturabo halted in their advance across the Segmentum Obscurus. His armored fist clenches slowly about the parchment, crushing, crumpling. The Iron Warriors must be stopped, and the Sons of Dawn will be the ones to stop them. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you've enjoyed this video, then do like and subscribe. Also, consider throwing me a groat or two, if I have indeed earned your bounty. And most importantly, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.